Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in about another minute or so. So just hang tight. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give it just one more minute and we'll go ahead and get started. And if you would like to put in the chat where you're hailing from, go ahead and do so. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started and be respectful of our time that we've taken out this evening. My name is Dr. Tracy Wilson, and I will be your moderator for this conversation, this very, very, very important conversation that's going to be talking about the Code of Ethics, the 75th anniversary for this fabulous document that helps us and aligns us on how to behave, ethically within our nursing practice. Again, I have my wonderful panelists that are going to be a part of this conversation. We have Dr. Nneka Sederstrom, we have Dr. Monica McLemore, and then we have Daniela Vargas. What I would just some housekeeping before we kind of get started is that if you have any questions along the way, go ahead and put that into the chat. And at the end, we'll go through those and ask those questions. So feel comfortable with, putting any of the information into the chat. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Sorry, there's a box that popped up in my way. All right. Well, again, good evening, everyone. And this conversation again is talking about that 75th anniversary of the code. As far as for conflicts of interest, none of us have conflicts of interest. I'm presenting today in my personal capacity, and the presentation, during this presentation, any thoughts that I'm giving are those of my own and not a reflection of my organization or any other entity. And I have no financial or other conflicts of interest. So the whole objective in regards to the little bit that I'm going to share with you and then this conversation is to identify and talk about just some of those changes to the revised code of ethics. And then we're going to really hone in and articulate ways to use the code to navigate the everyday ethical challenges that we're seeing in our clinical practice. So first off, I want to show you the group that actually helped to put this segment or this document together. So the 2025 edition, we have our co-chairs, our expert panel, and then our writing panel. I was a part of the writing panel, and then we have Daniela Vargas, who was also, she was one of the expert panel members in the making of this document. And again, the code is actually revised about every 10 years. And it is ensuring that it's staying current and that the trends that we're seeing going on in our environment and in our community is represented within the document. And so again, you see people from variety of background, educational status, as well as where they work and how they were able to influence this particular document. And so as far as for just the introduction, so again, we're going to touch on, I'm going to give you, again, what all of the actual provisions that were a part of this. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into the conversation around the code of ethics and how it can be applicable to you. So as far as for the structure of the code is structured by relationships, and this structure comes from early nursing ethics and literature, not to be confused with bioethics, which many nurses and other healthcare professions may be more familiar with. The framework of bioethics tends to have a more focus on resolving situational based or case based ethical dilemmas, whereas nursing ethics and the intent of the code is to place emphasis on the moral identity of the nurse and emphasize our values as a profession. It's also important for us to understand this distinction and that we draw on a range of ethical frameworks to inform our judgment. It helps to understand this and the background and historical context of the code because the history influenced how the content has evolved. So the code is divided into specific provisions, and we'll talk about those. And then each provision has interpretive statements that detail the various relationships essential to nursing. So we have provisions 1 through 3 that emphasize the nurse to patient relationship, capturing that essence of direct patient care, and then provisions 4 through 6 actually address the interactions among nurses and their colleagues, essential for collaborative professional environments. And then provision 7 through 9 is focusing on the actual nurse to society relationship, capturing and including those nursing roles and interests that go beyond the bedside and examines those structures and policy engagements. And then the biggest significant update to this code of ethics is the introduction of provision 10. And we'll talk a little bit more as to what that covers. So let's just take a look at what the provisions are. So as you can see listed here, you have provision 1, and it actually focuses on that practice with compassion and respect for an inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person. And then we have provision 2. This is that nurses' primary commitment is to that of the recipients of nursing care. So, and then breaking down each one of those groups into whether that's individual, family, group, community, or population. Provision 3, you see there is establishing this trusting relationship and that we are to advocate for the rights, health, and safety of recipients of nursing care. Provision 4, you see here, is where nurses have authority over nursing practice. So it's actually empowering us around that we have control of our nursing practice. Provision 5, as you can see, this is where the nurse has the moral duties to take care of their self. Because sometimes I know, being caregivers, whether we're taking care of patients, taking care of family and loved ones and friends, we sometimes forget that we have to take care of self. You cannot give from an empty cup. Provision 6 is that nurses, through that individual and collective effort, establish, maintain, and then improve ethical environment of the work setting. So this is honing in into the actual work setting itself. And then next we have provision 7. So this is where nurses then advance the profession through multiple approaches to knowledge development and professional standards. Provision 8 talks about building that collaborative relationship and networks with nurses and other healthcare and non-healthcare disciplines. Provision 9, nurses and their professional organizations need to work to enact and resource practices and policies and legislation. And we'll talk probably more about this as we break into each one of the panelists. And then lastly, provision 10. So nursing organizations and associations, this is looking at global nursing and the health community to promote the human and environmental health and well-being and flourishing. So where can you actually get this code of ethics? Well, there's a website right up here. So you go to codeofethics.ana.org. And then once you get there, you're going to click on practice and advocacy. And then once you click on that, then you're going to go down to Code of Ethics 2025. And then once you do all of those steps, then it's going to bring you here, which is the actual code of ethics. The beauty of this is that it actually has a drop down box and it shows you each one of the provisions. You can click on those and get to those interpretive statements. And then there's also a search right up here. If you see that search box, you can actually put in particular keywords that maybe you're wanting to know about. So, whether that's, implicit bias or racism or anything like that, you can put that into the search bar and you can actually get to that area within the provision where it's talking about that. So just a little housekeeping again information. If you're not a part of DMPs of color, this is where we want you to click. So you have the QR code listed there, and then following us on all your social media platforms as well. So with that being said, that's the end of my portion. Let's get into this conversation because I know that's what I'm excited about. So the first person I'm going to introduce and have her to talk just briefly is going to be Dr. Nneka Sederstrom. I'm going to turn it over to you to go ahead and kick off and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation today. I'm Nneka Sederstrom. I'm the Chief Health Equity Officer for Hennepin Healthcare in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am the first Chief Health Equity Officer in the state of Minnesota, and my entire purpose of being is to address racism in healthcare, in particular, trying to improve clinical outcomes for our Black and Brown population. Minnesota is fifth worst in the country for outcomes for Black people. And also, as we all know, we just had a remembrance of the 5-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. That was in our backyard. That was our EMTs. He was pronounced at our hospital. So it's very personal to us. And building out anti-racism work and figuring out a way forward is our call to action and our goal. And so my department was founded right after the murder, and we are about 150 strong, which is the biggest in the country as far as I know at this point. We're doing our best to try and change the culture of medicine, and I'm happy to have this conversation and talk about how the Code of Ethics assists in that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this conversation. I'm now going to turn it over for an introduction from Dr. Monica McLemore.
Hey y'all, it's Monica McLemore. I use she and her pronouns, and I want to acknowledge that I am currently calling in from Seattle, Washington, which is the unceded land of the Tulalip and Muckleshoot nations, and we thank our Native Indigenous colleagues for being caretakers of this land. I am currently a visiting professor at the Rory Myers College of Nursing at New York University. I remain an affiliate faculty at the University of Washington, and quite frankly, I am so excited that DMPs of Color and Dr. Danielle McCamey exist and are, highlighting this very important work. Those of us who work in reproductive health rights and justice will tell you that we rely very heavily on our code of ethics. And quite frankly, since 2005, I've actively been a participant in its revisions, demanding, pushing, begging, cajoling, negotiating to get people to understand the congruence of whiteness within our code, and white ladiness in particular, to understand that everything that we are currently experiencing in healthcare and public health was practiced on those of us in reproductive health rights and justice. And quite frankly, we've been able to thrive, survive, and care for people because of our conscientious need to provide care that is aligned with our code of ethics. I also am going to provide some comments, not just as a reproductive justice and forum scholar, but I also want to speak to, the congruence of professional organizations, as I also sit as the editor-in-chief of Health Equity Journal. And I feel very strongly in this current moment to be as transparent as possible around this single notion that all of this is temporary and that professional organization code of ethics should be the North Star that everyone is using to understand, to behave in this current moment. I thank you all for making the time this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are in the world, to be able to have this important conversation. And I'm going to pass it back to the team.
Thank you so much for that. And again, looking forward to taking a deeper dive with you. And last but not least, let's have Daniela Vargas. Go ahead and give your introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniela Vargas. I'm currently in San Francisco, California, the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ohlone people here in the peninsula. And so again, sacred land. I work as a public health nurse for the city and county of San Francisco. So just to put it out there, these are my own thoughts and comments and beliefs. They don't necessarily always align with the work that I do. But as far as my employer, but I do believe in everything that I do. I had the honor of being a co-chair for the 2025 revision for the Code of Ethics. I deeply understand the iterative process that we went through to go through this revision and publish the Code of Ethics for 2025 on January 29th of this year. It was a 2-year process. And so, as Tracy mentioned before, there were many people involved, including Tracy. And then, of course, people who gave us a lot of their time and their efforts doing public comment. Like Dr. McLemore said, she's been very involved in that process as well. And so, as we always say, we don't do this work alone, we do this in community. And so it's always an honor to have nurses across the country contribute their voices and their time to this work. It's so important for us to bring voices into the code. And I think that with the code for this revision, it was very intentional to make sure that folks had voice and that a lot of the work that was done in 2015 was built upon and also expanded to include topics, for example, like racism, which was some of the work that was launched by the commission, the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing. And so many of the definitions that the commission created and the work that the commission has done over the past 4 years also is reflective of the work on the code. And in addition, this work continues as the scopes and standards of practice are currently being revised in progress right now. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm excited to be discussing the Code of Ethics as we celebrate the 75 years of the code being part of the profession and what I call the beating heart of the profession.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again for your introduction and everyone that is here. So the first question that I'm going to kick off is going to go to Dr. Nneka. So many nurses report feeling morally injured by profit-driven systems that understaff units and prioritize metrics over care quality. I know that personally myself. So how does the 2025 Code of Ethics address the ethical responsibilities of the healthcare systems that protect nurses' well-being and moral integrity?
Yeah, thank you for that, and everyone. As not a nurse, I understand this as well, right? It is a significant issue in healthcare in general. The Code of Ethics directly addresses the ethical imperative it is to protect our nurses and their moral integrity and well-being, specifically through, I think it was Provision 5, that affirms this need to preserve the integrity of the profession and the institutional responsibility. And I think that that's super important because what we usually fail to do is pay attention to how integrity plays at the bedside. I think we oftentimes think that moral injury is just that fighting against a clinician, a physician saying, "Oh, you must do this thing," and then a nurse saying, "I don't want to. It's my moral code." And that's not it. It really is this expansion of understanding how the integrity of the profession shows up in situations of conflict and that supports and protects the ability for people to have civil discord and conflict about things. And I feel really strongly about pushing that element of ensuring that the the structural concerns in our hospitals in particular, and our clinics in particular, and how that hits on the integrity of the nurses, how to protect that from the system. I really believe that what we don't do now is not only like deepen the understanding of moral integrity and the moral injury that happens as a result of the integrity violations, but we never also attach onto it the additional burden of being a nurse of color and the injury that comes onto it as well. And that goes far deeper than things like staffing ratios or budget pressures or anything like that. It's like it's a different version of intersectionality. It's very much built into the system. Nurses of color face that dual burden of being a nurse and also then a person of color. And they are also required to somehow tampen down that part of them that's the of color part to just be nursing. But you can't do that when, especially like Dr. McLemore said earlier, that it is a very white woman driven profession. And when you bond over women versus whiteness, it's different, but that's not how it plays out, right? What it plays out at the bedside is it's a bond over whiteness over women. And so when we have women of color and nurses of color in particular, the moral corrosion that happens on top of I have the moral injury, I have the structural issues, and then I don't even have camaraderie amongst people in my own field. And I'm still other than that space, adds additional complexity of corrosion on us. And so it's like this expansion of structural oppression and that includes racism, that I think the code next iteration get to that next level and say those next of like additional words of not just facing the fact that there's moral integrity issues, but also addressing that the integrity gets further eroded because we have a system that uplifts oppression and is coercive and that does not do anything to allow nurses of color to actively thrive within these compromising scenarios. So I hope that we expand it. I hope that we really pay attention to how the structures of how we do healthcare not just impact our ability to perform our duties and be professionally feeling the professional integrity, but also give us an opportunity for some culture change, some change in some power dynamics, and some accountability measures that allows nurses of color to feel that they are also in deserving spaces, to that having that element of being a person of color respected and included in a different way.
Bravo. Kudos. I agree, concur, all of the things. I'll turn it now to like Daniela or Monica. Do you want to add anything to what she's already said so beautifully? Are there any additional thoughts to this question? No, again, thank you. That is, and I was really looking, be like, well, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? And so some of those solutions that you gave right at the very end, actually, I hope in the next iteration we can hope to include some of those things to improve it. So next, to Monica, I'm going to ask you, throughout your career spanning over 30 years, you've witnessed significant policy shifts affecting healthcare. So how can nurses effectively use the code to inform political advocacy in an era when healthcare has become increasingly politicized? And I can tell you, I've gotten this question so many times. They want to know how. How do I use this? This document is great, lots of words in it, but how do I actually use it? So please.
Well, I appreciate the question. I gotta set a timer because I could talk about this all day. And if I look strange to y'all, because I look strange to myself, it's because I have multiple screens. So don't judge me. I'm trying to figure out where to look where. Number one, our code of ethics, I already said this is a North Star, right? For me, I think about provision 1, 3, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, just in terms of anybody who is confused in this current moment should read the code to understand the language that you should be using to invite people into a conversation about what is the plan. So number one, first of all, any chaos and panic that people are currently experiencing is temporary. And we need to act as though the chaos, the panic, the firing of the federal workers, the canceling of grants, all of that is purposive to keep us from connecting with each other and using provision number 1 of our code, which states that we practice with compassion and respect. for the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person. Not every person we like, not every person who assimilates to whatever behaviors we want to see. It ends at with every person. So, I think in this fundamental moment, that allows for us to call out things that, in my opinion, are inherently cruel. So, what's inherently cruel, Dr. McLemore? Well, I think, illegally kidnapping citizens who have legal status to be here, whether it's on a green card or birthright citizenship, is cruel. And I don't have any problem saying that. Or when we think about provision number 3, trusting relationships. How many communities are going to trust us right now when we are not necessarily actively defending their right to exist because provision 1 told us to do that? Or what about the ethical work setting situation in number 6? If your work setting is erasing your previous work in compliance with edicts and mandates, then where does that work go? The multiplicity of nurses in all of our roles, knowledge producers, clinicians, that's number 7, right? We should be protecting federal databases because we have nurse researchers who use those data to design interventions to help improve the outcome of the public. So I keep coming back to, what's the plan? It is our job within hospitals, health systems, clinics, wherever we are, we create collaborative relationships among and between the disciplines. That's provision number 8. How are we supposed to do that when people are being starved of the resources that they need to do their work, right? The code gives you language to ask questions because anytime you are in a situation with chaos and panic, in my mind, the only appropriate reaction to that is to meet that with curiosity. And curiosity means that you have practiced what kinds of questions you want to be able to ask to better understand the environment and the situation you're in. And the code gives you that.
Wow. It exactly does everything that you just outlined for us. It does exactly that. Another person had also told me that the code actually provides or gives us cover as well too. So that's another way we could think of it. But I love how you broke down and made each one of those provisions actually living and breathing so we can use it. So no, thank you for that. And so I go now to Daniela. And so to ask you, in regards to the public health has been, has become increasingly politicized with evidence-based measures meeting resistance fueled by ideological divides. And so how does the revised code support public health nurses navigating these tensions while upholding their ethical responsibilities?
Thank you for that question. Provision 7, and just like Dr. McLemore mentioned, Provision 7 really talks about the multiple approaches that we as nurses generate knowledge. I remember Dr. McLemore and I actually had a conversation about this at another conference about how it's so important that we protect our knowledge. We are a profession, and we need to remember that we are the ones who generate the knowledge that gets passed from one generation to the next. We are the carriers, we are the caretakers of that knowledge. And so, right, we think about, right, that this is 75 years of the code, and that this code has gone through multiple revisions. And as a result, right, like many folks have said, there has been many changes in the code from its inception in 1950 to what it is right now in 2025. And that all comes from the knowledge that's been generated by nurses, especially nurses of color, who have greatly and profoundly contributed to our profession, made it better, made it stronger. And now we have a responsibility to uphold that knowledge and to protect it, because there's no one out there that knows our profession better than us. And so as a result, that's why the code is so important. And with all transparency, as we were working with this code, we weren't anticipating what might happen in 2 years. We were really thinking about, and as you know, Tracy, because you were part of it, as we were working through it, we were really thinking about which areas really needed to be updated. Where was the language that needed to be strengthened? Where was in 2015, what were those, glimmers of hope that got us through the pandemic? They got us through social unrest, that helped us and mobilized us during some of the darkest times that the profession had faced in the last 10 years. And so we, as a group, we got together and we started going through the code and sifting through some of those bright spots and saying, let's make this language stronger. Let's include things. Like, for example, one of the things that was not in 2015, but was alluded to, right, was about racism. It wasn't in 2015. You look at 2025, it's mentioned 17 times. It's mentioned in several provisions. It's mentioned in provision 1.1. It's in 6.4. It's in 9.4 specifically named under challenges of structural oppression, racism, and intersectionality. And so it was woven intentionally through the code to make sure that these issues weren't just like in provision 9 tucked away somewhere where you would then have to interpret yourself and say, oh, well, maybe they're alluding to that. No, we said, let's be very intentional and very specific about certain topics that need to be and need to have their appropriate language given to them, because we can't imagine what could happen in 2 years. We won't know what will happen in the next 10 years because this code is only revised every 10 years. And the work won't start again until 2035 to start the process again for the next code. And so what is it going to be, that language that's going to help the profession in whichever circumstance we're in the good times and in the bad, in times of chaos, but also in peace? What is going to help us move the profession forward and protect nurses? Because at the end of the day, again, we have an ethical responsibility, not just to ourselves as nurses, but also to the patients that we serve, the communities that we're fortunate to be of service to, and also to the society that entrusts us into that, right? Because some people forget that the code of ethics is a social covenant. It's the covenant that nurses have with society. People say, oh, it's really applicable to when you're a nurse. No. I say the moment you step into nursing school, you have signed yourself up for this. And so as a result, we want people to understand that these are the obligations that we as nurses have to ourselves and to the communities that we serve.
Beautiful. And I love how you kind of explain, that how it's, each iteration it's changed because it had to pull in things that had occurred. For example, it talks about AI. 10 years ago, that wasn't anything we were even thinking about, talking about. I mean, we've seen plenty of movies about AI, but not actually seeing it in healthcare. And then of course, we all lived and survived the pandemic. And so seeing provision 10 actually come into fruition for that reason around this pandemic impacted the entire globe in how we do nursing care. So I loved how you weave through the history and how it was necessary for it to be changed. So thank you for that explanation. Appreciate that. So this is going to be a question I'm going to pose to all of you all and get your perspective. So the code now explicitly addresses racism, and we've touched on it already, but I think we need to just go ahead and dive headfirst into it as a public health crisis. As we navigate a political climate where discussions of racism face backlash, especially now, What specific guidance would each of you offer nurses seeking to implement anti-racist practices in resistant environment? And I can again tell you in some of the conversations that I've had in regards to this is what they're wanting to know. How can I have this conversation with opposing views now blatantly in front of your face? So I will go with Dr. Nneka. Go ahead. Can you give us your perspective on this question?
Yeah, so this is my favorite conversation to have lately, right? Like everybody, especially with what I do, that's the number one thing people ask. They're always worried, like, oh, is your job okay? Because my entire purpose of being is addressing racism and health equity. And I'm like, as far as I know, it is. Because last time I checked, saying racism, doing things to eliminate racism, creating programming and interventions that address racism are not illegal. Nothing has made diversity, equity, inclusion, racism, anti-racism, any of the naughty words that are on the list, nothing has ever made them illegal. So as far as I am concerned, there can be temper tantrums thrown and people all upset about saying words that make them feel bad about themselves. But unless the law has changed, nothing about what I do or what my people do will change. And I think that that is a message that everybody needs to uphold. You know, I mean, I've never thought in all my life I would ever say I choose Harvard over Target, but here we are, right? In a room full of Targets, let's be Harvard, and standing up and saying, not today. Like I think that you and your space can stay there, but I'm not changing. I have said publicly in my institution that if there comes a day when doing this work, addressing inequities in medicine in particular, becomes illegal, then I'm just going to take a page out of the white man playbook. And when there's a constitutional change that makes addressing this illegal, I'm going to take a full 2.5 additional years and require some marshals before I stop doing that work, because apparently that was the bar set when they abolished slavery. It still took them 2.5 years with some marshals before people decided to get it. So if that's the measure of when we change, then that's going to be my bar. Whenever that day happens, 2.5 years plus some marshals, then I'll have a conversation with you about not doing this work. And I think that what we have from the beauty about this code and having those words specifically in them gives nursing armor. And what my concern is that also puts nursing on the forefront, because the physician groups aren't being this proactive and they're not being this strong and unified in saying these things. Like, our job is to uphold the rights of the humans and protect the patients that we take care of. And that is concerning, because what I don't want to see playing out is that organizations will have nurses who are saying, our code has tell us, it's this covenant. That's why I love what you said, Danielle. It's this covenant. This is my social contract with the people that I'm caring for. And I am promising that I will take care of them cross spectrum of all the things. I will do the best that I can to ensure that they have the best outcomes we can. But then our partners here, and their organizations aren't doing the same. They're not protecting them. They're not coming out as strong. And they're the ones who are going to cause that additional moral injury when the nurses unite against it. And so what I'm hopeful is that when the ANA and this new code leads the way, what I'm going to make sure that my institution does, and we're in that crazy space of notion negotiations, y'all. You know how that happens, how that works. And I am in a very white part of the country. So inevitably, anytime we talk about doing any sort of anti-racism training for the nurses, they always come back with, oh, we got it, we can do it ourselves. And yet they don't, right? So like, I'm loving that I can use this code now to say, listen, your people talked about how important it is. Look how many times the word is actually in the document, and we have you. We are there to help provide the additional coverage if you face physicians who aren't caring about it, if they're respiratory therapists who have no idea what to do, if they're surgeons who are giving you some sort of hell over it. Like, you've got additional folks to band together, because it's not illegal. It is still the world as we know it. And it is in these tumultuous times where people feel like the power of tyranny is to bend the knee before being forced to, that's the time to stand up the tallest, right? That's the time to make sure that you are really clear in your values, your positionality, and what you will and continue to push forward against. And in nursing, it's always been against injustice. So this right now is like the perfect timing for this new code. And I'm really loving all the times in which it says the actual naughty word of racism.
I love it. I mean, you gave us action items and already, so thank you for that. May need for you to tell us one more time when we get to that part. Daniela, do you have anything you want to add to this particular part?
Yeah, I think, again, just like what was just said, there was a lot of intentionality regarding adding racism specifically to the code this time around. We had, and then Tracy, we had these conversations about where we were going to put it, where it needed to go. Initially, right, we were, provision 9 was a good place to really put the bulk of it in there. But as co-chairs and as the team who did the revision for the code, we also realized that racism doesn't sit in isolation. It impacts every facet of nursing. And so that's why it was so important to weave it into many parts of the code. That's why you'll see it when, again, if you type in racism and you put it in the search, you will see it woven in through very specific provisions. And that's because racism impacts our profession as a whole, and it has held us back. It has held back the knowledge and the contributions that nurses, especially nurses of color, have brought. And as a result, I I think that that has held the profession back. And so we can't live like this anymore. And so if you think about it, right, some people will say, well, my institution may not be okay with it, or I live in a state where where DEI is being attacked right now. And so there's many resources that have been developed over time. Again, the code is the most recent one, right, in 2025 that it came out, right, the new revision. But there's also work being done nationally. The National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing has been in existence for 4 years now. It has generated a wealth of knowledge. We have scholars, for example, Dr. Nneka McLemore on this panel has generated knowledge in regards to racism, obstetric racism, issues around reproductive justice and how racism occurs. So it's not a new concept. I think part of it is in the times that we live, folks may feel a fear to retreat. And that's not what this code is meant to do. This code is supposed to lead us. And if anything, I tell people, we double down. We have a code, we have something that is asking us to, to move forward no matter what the climate is. And so there is no mistake in any of the wording of the code. It was very thoughtfully curated, and how it manifested is also a testament of who got to work on it. It was a diverse group of nurses across the country. It wasn't just one section of the country. It was diverse in age, it was diverse in gender, it was diverse in areas from certain practice and policies, and also from academia and education. It spans from what nursing looks like right now in 2025. And so we got to use the code in order to continue to drive our work. But again, the work also from the commission also impacted a lot of the work that was done on this code. And so I put it in there into the chat. I invite you all to go into the, we have the foundational report that was published. There's a lot of work in there that also strengthens the work that needs to be done. So it's not just the code, right, is our beating heart, it's our North Star, but there is a lot of great work being done out there, and that work can be applied and implemented in units, in organizations, in healthcare systems, and needs to be done right now. There's no way, we can't wait any longer.
Awesome. Thank you so much for explaining that. Monica, is there anything you want to add to this, or I have another question for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna add to this and I'm gonna tie in, thinking about the call to action because I want to be very mindful of our time. Number one, I mean, the whole notion, and I agree with everything that's been said, and I have some caveats around what's been said. So when you think about racism, the erasure of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I say the whole word because I'm not gonna be censored. That's not a thing. And part of, I think, what we're dealing with in this current moment is whether something is legal or not, whether or not a code of ethics are irrelevant to legality, which I also very much appreciate. We need to make a distinction as a field, a discipline, and a profession around this notion that our advocacy within nursing has always been for patients, for communities, for, not with and by. And that's always been through the legislative process. I think we need to participate in the litigative process. We need to start suing people. That needs to be a thing. I have to remind you, I'm a daughter of a civil rights judge, and he reminded me a couple of weeks ago that Thurgood Marshall successfully argued in 1956 the Brown versus Board of Education case, where he believed so much in the future of the education of Black children that he represented the NAACP before he was the first Black Supreme Court justice, because that was legal to segregate against children. So legality is actually never really, because again, going back to the way that legality is tied to whiteness, it is a tool. But legality is about legislation. We need to think about litigation, which brings me to my second point. There needs to be, I said this in 2018, there needs to be some civil disobedience in nursing that's grounded in our code of ethics because some stuff just isn't right. To Dr. Montalvo's point in the chat around censoring people in their abstracts at professional conferences, censorship is never okay. You will see nothing in our code of ethics that authoritizes or deputizes anyone to censor anybody else. You don't get to upright people's decisions because you don't like them. Right? Y'all remember when the Boston bomber situation went down and the nurses in the ED got fired because they went on Good Morning America and started talking about how they wasn't going to take care of them, or how we don't allow for people to not stabilize mass shooters when they come into the ED. People do all sorts of stuff that we don't like and we still take care of them. Our code is very clear about this. The last thing I'll say is this burden distribution. We can't expect the future nursing workforce to always carry the burden. It's on people like me and full professors and folk who have tenure and people who are institutionally not vulnerable to be able to make demands of our institutions, whether it's our professional organizations or our employers, to ensure that we protect the future brain trust and that we understand that our code of ethics is essential for us to be able to nurse the nation, which in my opinion is exactly what we need. We could nurse the nation and make all of this differently if we decided we wanted to spend some of that most trusted of the health profession's currency. And I would spend some of it in asking people, if all goes to fruition, if you agree with everything that's happening right now, if you don't think it's cruel, and quite frankly, you think that's the way of the future, then reconcile for me what the plan is when our insurance markets are destabilized, when our workforce has been so reduced in a stretch system that we already can't care for people. What happens when $800 million is cut out of Medicaid and people lose their public insurance? What, they're just going to die on the street? Oh, yeah, that's right. You can do that because we have an EMTALA case that, I need people to ask more questions, difficult questions. The code should give you the language to ask, okay, if we are never going to have a PRAMS or a BRIFIS or another social vulnerability index or a database for us to be able to design interventions, what are we supposed to use? That's not that hard, y'all. And it's not partisan. It is grounded in our code, which is a social contract. I like what Daniela said around it being a social covenant. That is a unique role that we have as members of the health profession. We sign a social contract. There's a reason we take an oath when we get penned and when we graduate. And so I would encourage us to really be mindful around this notion that we need to start suing people. The burden of distribution can't be on the future workforce. It's got to be on those of us who currently sit in vestiges of power or who are currently protected. And we all have to collectively decide that there's going to be a need for either academic medical centers or some coalition of people to participate in civil disobedience, refusing to provide care until we know we can provide ethical and moral care that's aligned with our code.
Like I need a tambourine. I need my church fan. I mean, that was
Southern, you almost
that
got
was a word that was shared there. Exactly, exactly. So I want to ask just one last question before I, ask each one of you all to give us your code, your call to action. But Monica, so the hashtag check the code campaign calls for the recommitment to our ethical foundations. And so, from your perspective, what would be one aspect of the revised code that represents the most significant evolution in nursing ethics that nurses should specifically recommit to?
We need to recommit that we all agree that nursing is a job, a profession, a call. It is more complex than any one professional organization or group of individuals can define. And given that complexity, we need to model and figure out a way to hold space for all that complexity. And I think human rights is the way to move forward.
Tracy, you're on mute.
Rookie mistake. Nneka, I was asking, is there anything that you wanted to add to that statement?
No, but I will throw in my call to action, which ties very nicely into Monica's, just really quickly, and so Danielle can take us home. I recently wrote a book, y'all, and one day it'll be out so y'all can see it. Yes, it's in its final stages, but the book that I wrote is about why is it that we can't get past this concept of racism in medicine? Why is it that we can't be better? It is a field that everybody will be engaged in some way, shape, or form, right? It is the great leveler. Nobody gets out of life alive. So somebody's going to need healthcare in some way, shape, or form. So why is it that we cannot get past racism, especially in this structure, right? I know that every structure has got it built in, but in this structure. And so it was actually, my husband is white, just as a caveat, and this was a conversation that he and I was having after George Floyd was murdered, and we were doing our part of the civil disobedience and paying attention and helping neighborhoods rebuild, right? It's down the street, we're packing up stuff. He's using his whiteness to get free materials to bring. And everybody was reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And in the book, right, Dr. Kendi says that racism is like the cancer of America. And my husband's a nurse. He's a neurocritical care nurse. And he and I were talking about that. And we're like, didn't quite sit right, this concept of racism being a cancer. And he said it to me, he's like, yeah, it doesn't work because if it was a cancer, we have ways to manage cancer, right? We can irradiate it, we can cut it out, we can throw some chemicals at it, and we can kill it and we can cure it. But racism doesn't feel like it can be cured. Racism is more like an addiction. And when he said that, this massive light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, we've been looking at this all wrong. Like, this is an addiction to power. And the drug that we get it is racism. So it's now 5 years later. I finally got it all out of my brain and on paper and wrote how we need to better relate as healthcare professionals to racism and look at it as an addiction instead of looking at it as a cancer. People rally around cancer. Money goes through cancer. Everybody gets sad. It's a passive thing. Addiction has shame. Addiction has impact on everybody. No one pays attention to it the same way. It's like, it's your problem, your issue. But we know how to deal with it and we know how to address it. So what I feel is my call to action in people now, because of this new lens that I have, is we got to stop thinking about the way we approach it from a dismantling a system that was set up that's out of our control, and start looking at it as caring for people who have an addiction who don't know how to get sober. And what are the elements that they need to go through to detox, to hit rock bottom, and to figure a way out of it and maintain sobriety, which will include relapsing. Somebody's going to fall off. They're going to do something stupid. We're going to have another racist event, right? That will happen, but it's not that that will cause us to go back into full shame. What it does is it's just the normal grace of dealing with the fact that we are humans, we make mistakes, and right now our society is addicted to this drug. And so what we have to shift is our thinking. And what I'm hoping that nursing can do as the heartbeat of the organization is start asking the right questions to help with this detox. Instead of saying, what do our patients need today for discharge? How about we ask things like, what could happen to our patients that could increase their harm? How about we start looking at things like, how are our hands impacting their ability to have a successful outcome? And it's not necessarily me. It could be the physician that I know is now on duty today that doesn't care. Then when you talk about any of the issues, they blow it off, right? Like, but bringing to the forefront the elements that we know that are morally corrosive and maintain the oppressive state, because it's the high that they're compromising. So I want people to be more thoughtful in figuring out ways to what I consider detox, and focusing on our new version of what are vital signs. Like, what does a healthy organization look like? What does sobriety look like? What would be normalized habits? How would we round differently? How do we break the denial and start doing disruptive care, right? Like, what are the things that get us out of our comfort zone? What are the small changes to our day-to-day that just bring it to the forefront to make people realize that we need to get into recovery and stop waiting for somebody to tell us this is the new drug to fix racism, right? That's the cancer thing. Here's the new chemotherapy, and now you're all sick. We sit back and we wait for that. That's not this. This has got to be very active, very intentional. You audit your own spaces, see how racism works in your places, start being more open and honest about tracking disparities and speaking truth to power, and figuring out all these little tidbits of how to root in truth telling and collect data that's like authentic, and support the voices that have been the disruptors since the beginning, and help. They're the ones who are like the canaries in the coal mine. They're the ones who've been saying, y'all been addicted. You're not hearing me. I'm telling you, every time I try to talk about this Black patient saying that their pain is not being managed and they like being ignored, or this Black nurse came up and said, look, you all aren't paying attention to this very important element, and that voice being silenced. We see all these little elements of hits that I call them, right? Like, these are the little highs that people get. We can start doing things to break that. And I think that my hope is, as we start these small little interventions of detox, we can finally get brave enough to look at a system and say, what actually can we do to now move into recovery? Because we recognize that we're sick and we know how to get better.
I love that. So I'm gonna, Daniela, is there anything that you wanted to add to this particular part? And then I'm gonna turn it over to you to leave us with your final thought or your call to action.
Yeah, I think what's been said is so powerful. And I think that that also fits in with the call of action in regards to, I mean, some of my work that I do right now in my doctoral work on like building systems that are actually supportive of the next generation of nurses. And we can't build these systems without acknowledging that issues like racism or any of the isms, right? Ableism, and the list could go on and on. But all these isms impact how folks can access certain resources. And so, again, just like Dr. McLemore talked about the different levels of racism, I mean, these are all built into the structure. It impacts how you get to do this. As a public health nurse, I see this every day in my job. I see how some clients are able to access certain things and others can't. and others need heavy advocacy in order to be able to access these things. And it shouldn't be that way. If folks need things and they're going to the right place, they should be able to access the things that they need in order to thrive. And this is not just to our patients, this is as a profession as well. We need to be able to support our next generation of nurses so that they have the things that they need to thrive. We don't all, we think about equity mindset or justice mindset. We don't all start off at the same starting point. And as a result, yet we're all be given the same resources and it's like, oh, here you go. We're trying to be equal with everyone. But that as someone who still remembers going through nursing school it's been, I'm literally kind of celebrating my 10 years since I started nursing school. It's like, I remember when I didn't have certain access to things, or I had classmates who had family who were already in the health professions. And as someone who's a daughter of farm workers, I don't have those connections. I didn't know my way of how to navigate healthcare as a brown indigenous nurse. And so I had to learn how to do those things. And so just like Dr. McLemore says, like now that I'm on the other side of it and I've been a nurse now, and in the profession now for 10 years, I have a different perspective of how I can support nurses to get through to the other side. And I always tell nurses, we need you. Like, we need you in order to make this profession better and stronger. There's no way that me by myself, I'm going to do this on my own. And so we need to be very mindful of how we distribute resources. And that all starts with the gatekeeping of how people enter nursing. Who lets people enter nursing? And then after that, who lets people go into certain specialties? Because as a brown indigenous woman, I saw certain people in my cohort when I graduated from nursing school who were able to find jobs very quickly after nursing school. But it was always the brown and the black students who struggled to get jobs, especially in very specific areas like reproductive health or labor and delivery in OB. And then we wonder why we have these problems around obstetric racism, right? Because who gets to go into these areas? And so I think the takeaway to this is we need to invest into our next generation nurses. We also need to invest in research that isn't normally researched. I know that was one of the main objectives of the commission when we had the seed money, that we could fund certain projects that are not traditionally funded around racism in nursing. And the wonderful thing was ANA Enterprise also matched that seed money so that they could give those to the state nursing associations that wanted to start to do this work. Because the funding isn't available if the organizations aren't willing to put that money out there. So we need to invest in ourselves. And we also need to move this work forward, because if we don't do it, no one else is going to do it for us. And so it's so important that in this period of time, when things are being dismantled and us being distracted by all of these little mini dumpster fires, that we recenter ourselves and say, what is important for the nursing profession right now? What do we need to do in order to get ourselves through this period of time? Because it's not going to be forever. And how do we survive this period of time and go from survival mode to thriving, so that we can continue to build our profession? Because we can fight, but we also need to remember that we have folks coming into the profession that are looking to us for ethical and moral advice, or for guidance. And us as nurses, we have the responsibility to show our next generation that they're capable of doing these things and more, and that we're going to guide them through it. And just like Dr. McLemore said, those who are in power, start using that power and moving the profession along, because we can't wait till we put out all these mini fires that are going on, because it's just distracting from the overall point that we need to stay together, we need to come together, and we also need to do the work. I mean, that's one of the things that I think I have learned to appreciate as a nurse, that right now in this period of time, if you look at all the other health professions and the work that they're doing, we're the only profession leading this work right now, that are coming out and really purposely putting money and time and energy and going out and actually building it, just like I said, putting it in our code of ethics, but putting it in scopes of standards of practice. These are all things that are intentionally being put in and built in, because these are issues that are not going to go away, and we're either going to lead it, or there's going to be another profession that's going to try to have us lead them, be led by them. And I think that right now we have the right, as nurses, because we're the largest profession, we're 5 million strong, and we have the power to be able to move along this work, and also be able to call ourselves out, but also call people in, and also tell other professions it's your job to also do this work too.
Brilliant, brilliant. I know for me, I have the call to action from each one of you all. So, what it sounds to me is that we need to get active. We need to use our voice. We need to call things out when we see it. One of the analogies that I always use is that, just like with TSA, it tells you, see something, say something. This is what we need to be doing as a profession, speaking up when we see things that are not morally and ethically correct. I know for myself, I went back and got my bioethics and medical humanities master because I wanted more knowledge in this particular area. I wanted to understand it so that I could speak truth to power. So I'm hoping by having these conversations that we are empowering nurses all across the nation to activate and utilize their voices, because we make such a difference into patient and communities and global healthcare. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to you all. What questions do you all have that we can answer for you? I've seen some wonderful comments in the actual chat, so thank you for those. But if there's anything else that you would like to ask, this is your time to do that before we kind of close out. So we have someone that's a little overwhelmed with information, that this was a lot, meaty, intellectual meal tonight. So they got to sit on it. And so we understand that. I think all of us are on social media. So if you would like to reach out to any of us to have a little bit more, conversations, please feel free to do just that. Again, we want to thank DNPs of color, to our wonderful, fabulous, amazing CEO and founder that is leading the charge with this conversation. If you want to say something, Danielle, please say something to the crowd before we sign off. You're on mute.
On mute.
Yeah, there you go.
We over here just muting, and hey y'all, thank y'all for coming out tonight. Just excited for this amazing conversation. I knew it was gonna be dope because the panelists are dope, and shout out to Dr. Wilson for pivoting and being our moderator for tonight, but really appreciate the energy and the charge and the call to act, y'all, because we ain't got time. We need to be out here in these streets. That's all I gotta say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. One question did pop into the chat.
Can I take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So just for context, I'm gonna read it out loud so everybody. So what advice do you have for us emerging nursing scientists being told to pivot for survival? How do we stand 10 toes down with protection and covering to remain committed to the work? Go ahead, Monica.
Well, first of all, for any early career people on the call who are not institutionally being supported, let me say two things. Number one, thank you so much for your work. You are our future brain trust. And number two, your work is valid, meaningful, and necessary. That said, you got to decide if you want to pivot or not. I have a whole ass table of words that go against the Penn America BART words that's not on that list that people can use. Some people feel morally away about their being censored. So they already know that it's a line for them that if their institution is not going to back them and they don't want to pivot, then they're going to either have to leave or disassociate with that organization, and that's fine. But for those of you where that's not your red line, send me an email. I'll send you the list of words where you can rework your work. Here's the thing. We have always had to outsmart racism. It is a nimble system. It changes and morphs over time, and we can outsmart it because, it instills fear for a very specific reason, because it only works on people who are afraid. Number two, if you are challenged by your investment portfolio and like the rest of us, we need money and we have to exist and all these other things, decide what you are willing to do and or not do in order to be able to maintain your work. Number three, you should have institutional support that will allow for you not even to have to think. I can't tell you how many young early career scholars around the country have called me up, have asked me. I put out a full professor challenge. Anybody besides me that's a full professor, if you got access to grants, resources, startup money, whatever, you need to be hiring our early career people or contracting with them around different kinds of projects you want to work on. I'll have a whole offline conversation about this. I have had an entire $14 million research portfolio. I have never had federal funding despite applying 13 times. It is possible to have a very successful career. Those of us in reproductive health, rights, and justice have a lot to teach you about working with philanthropy and university development and alumni relations and grateful donors and grateful patients. There's a whole other way to be able to finance parts of our scientific enterprise. Most people have only been trained in one. Your work is important, it's necessary, it's valid. Find mentors who will help you keep doing it.
Again, that's a word right there. I need to send around the offering plate to everyone. Another question came in, Dr. Cecilia. Hey girl, how you doing? So have we also thought about developing databases to house, persevere nursing related work around health equity, etc.? Nneka, do you want to answer that one?
I've not seen any particular databases that are hanging out specific around even preserving any health equity related work, let alone nursing in particular. But that doesn't mean that you can't start an internal track list, so to speak. My struggle with databases, though, especially related to this work, is it's so ever changing. And right now, all the stuff in this work are just highlighting the things we already know are problems, right? We haven't really started building out a lot of solution-oriented stuff. And so when we get there, then I think databases and other resource toolboxes like that are important. If there are elements within your own organization or things that you have power over that you can start collating and putting together, or even finding a coalition. I'm looking at Danielle thinking, hey, that could be something that DOC starts to do, like building out some reservoir where people could say, I tried this effort, this worked, and it just goes into a database for other folks who are like, I'm trying to figure out how to start something. DOCs have got like a database of resources, even as minimum as things like, this is a person who works in this organization that's similar to yours, who's trying to do something that's similar to you and making that networking connection. Then we can start building up that kind of toolkit. But as of now, I don't have any particular one where I would say, yes, go to this. There are a lot of people who've done a lot of like health equity branded toolkits and roadmaps and all of the buzzwords that are out there. None of them worked. None of them make any sense because all of them are still trying to figure out a way to address inequities in a system that was designed for inequity. So like, unless you're creating I haven't seen yet an architectural design of what a new system looks like, because that's what we have to do, is we got to build a new house instead of trying to fix this one. I haven't seen that yet. So all the ones that are out there now are trying to remodel a kitchen with a foundation that's falling out, and that doesn't make any sense. So I think we can start building what that new house looks like, and that's going to take farming from everybody who's thinking about this, their ideas of what that new system should look like, and then create that database tool under the heading of these are the elements we think the new architect needs to have in it.
Wonderful. Well, we have come to the end of this power-packed, powerful conversation. Thank you to each and every one of you all that have spent your evening. Could have been anywhere else, but you decided to be here with us. So on behalf again of the DMPs of Color and to our wonderful panelists, Dr. Monica McLemore, Daniela Vargas, and Dr. Nneka Sederstrom, we want to say thank you again. Have a wonderful, wonderful, and blessed evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.